Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If you needed some of your retirement money tomorrow, not someday, tomorrow, do you actually know how much of it you're allowed to touch without asking anyone's permission? Most people's honest answer is some version of none of it, I think, until I'm old. That answer is wrong for more people than you'd expect. Not because of some loopholes, because of a rule that's been sitting there in plain sight the entire time. One most people never get talked about, because it doesn't come up unless something forces it to. Mira is 43. Retirement is still a long way off. And this past week, she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, actually reading the fine print on her Roth IRA statement, because her daughter mentioned a friend who'd gotten hit with taxes and a penalty pulling money out of one. What Mira found surprised her enough that she called her financial planner just to double-check it. He confirmed it, and it changes how she thinks about that account, even though she has no plans to touch it. Her daughter's friend, it turned out, had done something specific, pulled out more than she'd actually contributed, assuming the whole account worked the same way underneath. It didn't, and that one misunderstanding cost her real money, in taxes and a penalty she never saw coming on a portion of the account that genuinely does have rules attached to it. Mira's version of the same account, it turns out, doesn't have that problem, not because she's more careful, but because she never needed to touch more than the part that was always fine to touch. She just didn't know, until this week, exactly where that boundary actually sat. Here's what I find genuinely interesting about this. It isn't a secret. It isn't hidden in the way a lot of financial content likes to imply things are hidden. It's published, publicly available information, and it still manages to surprise almost everyone who hears it for the first time, including people who've had one of these accounts for years. My name is Nicholas, you can call me Nick, and I spend a probably unhealthy amount of time thinking about money. Not in a here's a clever trick kind of way. More in a, why does one of the most useful rules in personal finance barely ever get explained clearly kind of way. Today isn't really about strategy, it's a structural fact, how a specific type of retirement account is actually built on the inside, and which part of it was never locked in the first place. Once you see it, you can't really unsee it. Here's the assumption almost everyone carries around, and it isn't a foolish one, it's just incomplete. People treat a retirement account like one single sealed container. Money goes in, the lid closes, and nothing comes out until a specific age arrives, somewhere around 59 and a half. That's true for some retirement accounts. It is not the full story for a Roth IRA specifically. A Roth IRA isn't one sealed box. Internally, the IRS treats it as several separate layers stacked on top of each other, and they don't all follow the same rule. One of those layers has never been locked at all. This isn't a fringe detail buried in a footnote somewhere. It's how the account is fundamentally structured, but almost nobody explains it that way. Because most people only ever learn about Roth IRAs through the lens of, when can I retire? Not what happens if I need this earlier. The distinction only becomes relevant until the moment someone actually needs to look closely, which is exactly why it stays invisible for years at a time. And this is exactly the kind of gap I find genuinely interesting to look at on this channel. Not because everyone did anything wrong, just because a piece of genuinely useful, genuinely public information sat there, unused, for years, simply because nobody had a reason to go looking for it. Picture a cabinet with 3 drawers, stacked bottom to top. The bottom drawer holds every dollar you personally contributed, the actual money you put in, from your own paycheck over the years. The middle drawer holds any money you moved in from a separate account through a conversion. The top drawer holds the growth, the earnings the account produced on its own, through the market. Here's the part almost nobody explains clearly. The IRS has a strict ordering rule for a Roth IRA. Money always comes out of the bottom drawer first, and the bottom drawer, your own contributions, has no lock on it at all. Not an age lock, not a time lock. You can take that money out at any age, at any time, completely free of both tax and penalty, because you already paid tax on it the year you earned it. Mira has been contributing to her Roth IRA since season 1 of this channel. A modest amount most years, sometimes more when things were good. Added up over the years, and her own contributions come to roughly $34,000. The account itself is worth $61,400 today. That $34,000 is her unlocked drawer. She could withdraw every dollar of it tomorrow. No tax, no penalty, no waiting for 59 and a half, and it would be entirely within the rules. It's the remaining $27,400, the growth on top, that stays behind the two locked drawers above it. It's worth pausing why this rule exists in the first place, because it isn't an accident or a loophole. It's actually a fairly logical piece of tax design. Mira already paid income tax on every dollar she put into that account, the same year she earned it. The government has no further tax claim on money it already taxed once. The growth, on the other hand, has never been taxed at all, which is exactly why it's the part with real conditions attached before it can come out untouched. This isn't a workaround. It isn't a clever strategy someone found. It's simply how the account was designed to work from the beginning. Most people just never had a reason to look closely enough to notice. Now, I want to pause here, because there's an obvious question forming. Okay, Nick, if the bottom drawer is unlocked, does that mean it's a good idea to actually open it? That's the right question to ask, and the honest answer has a genuine catch in it, one that catches people who only half understand this rule. Here's where people who've heard a rumor about this rule tend to get into real trouble. The unlocked drawer only stays unlocked while you're taking out your own contributions specifically. The moment a withdrawal exceeds that amount, you're no longer pulling from the bottom drawer, you've moved into the conversion layer, or the earnings layer above it. And those layers have real conditions attached. A 5-year holding period on conversions, and both a 5-year holding period and an age requirement on earnings before they come out tax and penalty free. Have you ever heard someone say, Roth IRAs let you take your money out anytime, and just left it at that? That sentence is true for exactly one of the 3 drawers, and dangerously incomplete for the other 2. Rick Edelman has argued for years that as retirements stretch toward 35 years or longer, the value of genuine flexibility, money you can actually reach without penalty, matters more than it used to. An unlocked drawer that quietly sits there for decades is exactly that kind of flexibility. But flexibility only works in your favor if you know precisely where the lock actually is. There's a second layer of nuance worth naming honestly, because it catches even people who understand the basic contributions of rule. If Mira had ever converted money into this account from a separate traditional account, moving pre-tax dollars over and paying the tax at the time of the move, those converted dollars sit in the middle drawer, and each individual conversion carries its own 5-year clock before it's fully free of penalty, counted separately for every conversion she's ever made. It isn't one clock for the whole account. It's a fresh one for each conversion, which is precisely why this can get complicated quickly if someone's been converting money over several different years. Mira isn't planning to withdraw anything from that account. She doesn't need to, but she told me something after that called her planner that stuck with me. I didn't need to use it, I just needed to know it was there. That's really the point of understanding this rule, for most people. It's not a withdrawal strategy, it's a piece of information that quietly removes one specific fear, the fear that every dollar in that account is completely out of reach until a specific birthday arrives. For Mira, roughly a third of her account was never actually locked at all. Knowing exactly which third changes how the whole account feels, even sitting untouched. There's a version of this that matters even more for someone earlier in the process than Mira, someone who's hesitant to start contributing at all, partly because the idea of locking money away for 30 years feels genuinely intimidating. For that person, this isn't a footnote. It's a legitimate reason the account is less rigid than its reputation suggests, from day one, not just after decades of contributing. It's worth being honest that this shouldn't become a reason to treat a retirement account like a savings account either. The unlocked drawer exists. That doesn't mean it should be used casually, or often, or as a first resort when a smaller cash cushion would do the job better. It's a piece of structural flexibility worth knowing about, not an invitation to lean on it. So, back to that question from the beginning. If you need some of your retirement money tomorrow, do you actually know how much you're allowed to touch? For a lot of people with a Roth IRA, the honest answer turns out to be more than they thought, and for a much simpler reason than they expected. Not a loophole, not a trick, just a drawer that was quietly unlocked the entire time. None of these changes what Mira is actually going to do with her account. She's not planning any withdrawals. The growth stays invested, doing exactly what it's supposed to do for the next 20+ years. But there's a real difference between an account that feels completely sealed and one where you know, specifically, which part was never sealed at all. And that difference showed up in something as small as how she talked about the account with her daughter afterward, calmer than she expected to be about a conversation that started with a friend's expensive mistake. Mira closed her laptop that evening without touching a single dollar. But the account looked different to her after that. Not bigger, not smaller, just better understood. Here's something Mira does before she ever acts on a number like the ones in this video. She calls someone whose job is to check it, a CPA, a tax professional, someone who actually knows her specific situation, not because the math here is wrong. Because her life has detailed a video never could. If you take one habit from this channel today, take that one. Before you move a single dollar based on anything you just heard, verify it with a qualified professional first. That's not caution, that's just how the machine gets built correctly. So, I want to ask you something. Before today, did you know that part of a Roth IRA was already unlocked? Or did you assume the whole account was sealed until retirement, like most people do? Drop it in the comments. I read every one, and if this was useful, subscribe, because there's more to this cabinet than the bottom drawer. Next time we're going to look at the 2 drawers above it, and one specific mix-up between them that quietly costs people more than almost anything else in this account. I'll see you there.